Hello students, welcome to EPG Patashala. I am Dr. K.R. Ram Mohan, Associate Professor, Head Department of Anthropology, Sikkim University. Today we are going to discuss a module on tribal absorption, assimilation and integration. This module comes from the paper Indian Anthropology. Before we discuss these three important concepts, let us see what are the objectives of this module. To know the various approaches put forward by various thinkers on how the scheduled tribes to be integrated into the mainstream Indian society. To know various anthropological perspectives on this process of absorption, assimilation and integration. To know the criticism put forward by various scholars on this process. We all know that the concept of tribe has been described by anthropologists, and what are the distinctive features of a tribal community, and the scholars which are worked under the colonial administrators have come out and said that the tribes are different from the mainstream civilization and they don't look or have a similar culture with the rest of the societies. The term scheduled tribes first appeared in the Constitution of India, where Article 36 defined scheduled tribes as such tribes or tribal communities are parts of or the groups within the tribes are deemed under Article 342 to be called as scheduled tribes for the purpose of the Constitution. Hence, the criteria to term this scheduled tribes are following as: they should have primitive traits. In a sense, they should have primitive characteristic features, a uniqueness or distinctiveness in their culture, their social organization, and these communities are geographically isolated, which have no contacts with the rest of India, or they are not ready to change their culture. Their psychological disposition is such that they want to remain in their own confines of their own culture, and the level of development is completely backward. Now, being understood this, that these tribes are in this state of affairs, the whole problem is whether to put these tribes in its own place or to do not touch them. If we do not look into their affairs, they remain like that forever. When the other parts of India are developing socially, technologically, economically, it is unfair to leave out or do not attend their problems, or just to keep it like that. Or we have to bring them, make them assimilated or put them on par with the other social groups in Indian society. So how do we approach these communities? What mechanisms are required to bring them into the mainstream, both physically, psychologically, economically? So there are various approaches put forward by different scholars to how to merge them, or how to include, or what kind of social exclusion mechanism is prevailing, and how to bring the social inclusion of these tribes into the mainstream society is challenging. whether they have to be segregated from the mainstream, the policy of segregation, or they have to be assimilated through various means, or they should be integrated. So this is the biggest debate and a concern after post-independent period. The policymakers are confronted with these kinds of issues, whether to put them as a separate category or treat them as equals and put them and integrated. And what are the problems inherent if you put them into the mainstream society? So, with these kinds of issues at hand, it is not that easy to bring them into the mainstream or the so-called mainstream Indian society. So, before independence of Indian state, there is an existence of Jamindari system where people are working under this masters, the landlords. And Britishers want to bring some kind of a changes in this Jamindari system. So that there should be less exploitation. And this policy did not reach to the tribal societies. But this kind of Jamindari system was much prevalent in the rest of the parts of India, where the administrators could not reach to the tribal areas. So for the first time, very relevant has suggested that, which is an advisor of tribal affairs to the government of Assam, thought that the tribal communities should be treated separately. They need not get the same kind of administration like the rest of the communities in India. They want to see that this isolation should continue, but with the new administrative programs, so that the political dominance in these tribal regions can be minimized and a new system of production relations can emerge. So, but British government was to minimize these chiefs and Jamindari systems in most of these tribal pockets. Hence there is a debate going on, and Elvin suggested that this should be a segregationist approach might be suitable for the tribal pockets in many parts of India. And the normal laws prevailing, which should be suited to the tribal areas in terms of the Scheduled District Act of 1874, and it has given a shape that these are the backward areas in the Government of India Act of 1999. However, both the tribal and non-tribal areas were both partly and fully excluded in the Government of Act of 1935. That the tribal areas need a separate act and the non-tribal areas need a separate act, because this segregationist approach has been proposed. At that time, Mahatma Gandhi reacted sharply to the segregation of various communities, where this isolation policy is not good and may be harmful. While taking the consideration of the segregationist approach by Elvins, suggesting that there need a special attention in the governance, Gandhi thought that the excluded areas for Adivasi were put into watertight compartments, and the welfare measures which have been targeted for this may not get a proper attention, or it will not get proper implementation. Hence, he said that tribal welfare program should be taken lot of importance, and we have to give more attention to that. Finding fault with this segregationist approach, some scholars like Gure said that tribal should be assimilated into the Indian society, and this assimilation process must be a continuous contact with the culture of one population to the another population, which can lead to social reform and can create problems, because if we follow the isolation approach. Even Kroeber opines that one can accept assimilation only when the outlook of one society is more inclusive, in a sense that if the predominant society or non-tribal society is ready to accept the tribal community into an inclusive fold, and the tribal community should also be open for that inclusion, only then assimilation process will be meaningful. Otherwise, this assimilation process will be meaningless, and the purpose is not solved. Hence, when we are combining a weaker or less popularly known culture to a strong or dominant culture, the assimilation process should be taken care of. And there are many instances where the tribal people came in contact with the rest of Hindu Indian population and started converting themselves into mainstream Hinduism, which has also been understood as Hinduization, or where some Christian missionaries have entered into these pockets and converted them into Christians, where the tribal original religion, customs and practices have been vanished. So there is an inherent problem in this process of assimilation. So this culture contact gave different types of tribes on acculturation level. With this, Gure said that some tribes are partially Hinduized, some are fully Hinduized. Now, seeing that there is some inherent contradictions and potential dangers in this assimilation policy, there evolved an integration policy where the experiences of isolation and assimilation policy, which were put forward by Gure, led the thinkers and anthropologists and social reformers to adopt something midway between the complete isolation project and the complete assimilation project. There should be some intermediary mediated path, because total isolation is not advocated and total assimilation project is also not advocated, because both approaches have potential loopholes and it warrants a lot of problems, because the base of Indian crux of social fabric is unity in diversity, where all religions, all linguistic groups, all ethnic groups, despite the differences, have the commonality that there is an Indianness was taken into consideration in the integration policy. So thinkers thought that since many social groups and communities are living together harmoniously over generations, perhaps scheduled tribes also can come in contact and can be a part of this diversity group and still maintain unity among themselves. And this approach has led to what is called the integration approach. And the whole impetus is given by Jawaharlal Nehuru's vision of a tribal policy which shaped in 1950s. A Nehruvian approach advocated that one should not take these two standpoints, that tribal groups should be like museum specimens. It requires a study, it requires an observation. And the other approach certainly erodes tribal culture if you are assimilated into a bigger group, and hence the individuality is lost, the culture is lost, the customs are lost, and you have become the followers of the main tradition. So gradually, towards the end of 1950s, a new policy has emerged under the vision of Nehru, under the famous scheme of Panchashil, the 5 points scheme, where the 5 fundamental principles can be incorporated into the tribal society. And the 5 tenets of this program is that, according to Nehru, is that people should develop in their own genius line, and one should not anything impose on them and force them to do that. And these tribal groups should have a right to their own land, forests and other resources, and we have to respect these rights. We should be trained and develop people of their own population in their own administrative matters. And there should be a mechanism that outsiders should not come into their lives or in their territories. We should not impose over administrative rules in these tribal areas. And one should understand what is the social interest which is intertwined in their own cultural setups. And we should not try to judge how much money we are giving to these communities, but one should only interest how to improve the quality of life. Now, being understood the Nehruvian approach of tribal policy and tribal administration through his Panchashil, anthropologists also put forward important perspectives. Bose has given attention to how tribes get attracted themselves to societies by mixing themselves in with the non-tribal societies, and warranted that these should be protected and must give them security. With his famous ethnographic works, he has published that most of the tribes are being absorbed into mainstream Hinduism, and he says that there is a Hindu mode of absorption. And M.N. Srinivas also talks about the process of Sanskritization, where how a particular inferior, lower social caste groups try to mobilize towards upward social mobility by imitating the upper caste customs and traditions. Equally important is the Surajit Sinha's understanding of the process of assimilation, where he tries to say that there is a continuum existing between castes and peasants in the Indian civilization. And some of the peasant features are being absorbed into the tribal fold. And Sinha projected a constitutional framework with an egalitarian and democratic ideology, so that the solidarity strengthens by taking the caste peasant continuum. So the process of integration within the framework of political economy has to be carefully seen. To what extent this is suitable to tribal societies? So these studies requires how to bring these ethnic communities by minimizing the differences between the tribes and the caste groups. Importantly, Gure has vehement about this isolationist approach, suggesting that there should be a commitment by the anthropologist to look into the needs of the tribal societies when we want to mix them with the larger society, the Indian society. Hence, the isolationist approach has drawn a lot of criticism, which how can we put them as specimens? So in that sense, there are other anthropologists like S.C. Roy who said that by studying ethnographic works on Birhors and Kurbas, these tribals are falling prey to culture contacts, and there should be warranted to create a lot of awareness and sensitize them towards this exploitation by the outsiders. Parallelly, Majumdar also has produced a lot of ethnographic works on Ho, and came out that the tribes are being victims of this industrialization process, where new forms of alien culture are entering into their culture. Now, being understood this, the isolationist approach, which is a product of the colonial masters that divide and rule, that each specific territory has its own specific rules. And Dubé's opinion that in India, the tribe have never been isolated. There was some contacts with non-tribals. Hence, the policy of isolation is not at all suitable, which only benefits the non-tribal communities. And even Gure also said that the tribal mode of assimilation is not at all good, because there could be an inflow of the dominant religious ideology into this thing. Understood the various policies put forward by the isolationist approach and the assimilationist approach, Nehru thought that due to isolation, the loss of tribal identity will be there, because the main stronger identity will emerge and the lesser known identity will be disappears. So how to bring an autonomy for these people? How to protect their culture, which is unique on its own? So with these things, he proposed this, that they should be integrated carefully, slowly, without disturbing their culture, without the intrusion of the outsiders, without distributing their institutions. So with this, the integration policy has taken its shape, and many have supported that there are certain advantages with this integration policy, because this takes the middle path. And with this, Elvin's approach for a philosophy for NIFA has also supported this concept of integration. So in this policy says that the tribal practice and custom should be preserved, and there should be complete economic rights for these communities in their own light, where outsiders should not come and take away their privileges, because they have been there for centuries together. So the core of tribal development should be focused on safeguarding their rights, their customs, their belief systems. So tribes should be distinguished on their resources, their culture, by not making any harm to the core cultural values. So various approaches have been put forward to address these problems of tribal communities. To summarize, in the beginning, the British colonial masters who had been suggested that there should be an isolationist approach, that they have to be looked after separately. There should be separate laws, there should be put under separate scheduled areas, which the laws and governance system should be different with other policies. But with the advent of independence, with the advent of Nehruian policy through his Panchasheel, came out with a policy, with a philosophy that tribals should be, or tribal communities should be, slowly integrated into the mainstream. Because if in assimilation process there is an always danger that the dominant ideologies will be forced upon them, the dominant lifestyle will be put, and many ethnographic studies have shown that tribes have changed according to the dominant communities' ways and practices. So the tribal development program, welfare schemes are centered around this integrationist approach, to put them, not to isolate them, in the mainstream Indian society.